January 8, 2026, 4:17 a.m. Colombian jungle, 15 miles from the Venezuelan border. 40 U.S. Marines move through darkness toward a cocaine laboratory that processes 340 million in drugs annually. They have Colombian guides. They have intelligence. They have surprise. Or so they think. 200 cartel fighters are waiting in the jungle. Not running. Not hiding. Waiting. With automatic weapons, prepared positions, and a plan to kill every American who came for their lab. What happens in the next 6 hours will test everything these Marines believe about combat and courage and survival. But the real story isn't the firefight. It's what the cartel knew, and how they knew it. The operation was called Serpiente Verde, Green Snake, joint U.S.-Colombian mission targeting Clan del Golfo's cocaine production infrastructure. Intelligence had tracked the lab for 3 months. Satellite imagery, informant reports, intercepted communications. The lab was remote, protected by jungle, but not impregnable. The mission plan was straightforward. 40 Marines from 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. 12 Colombian Special Forces as guides and interpreters. Insert by helicopter 5 miles from target. Approach on foot through darkness. Hit the lab at dawn. Destroy equipment. Capture personnel. Extract by helicopter. Simple. Clean. Textbook. At 2:30 a.m., 4 MH-60 Black Hawks lifted from a forward operating base. 40 Marines, 12 Colombians, gear, ammunition. The helicopters flew nap of the earth through mountain valleys. No lights. Pilots using night vision. Radio silence maintained. At 3:42 a.m., they landed in a clearing. The Marines moved out immediately. Standard patrol formation. Point element. Main body. Rear security. Weapons ready. Every man scanning his sector. The jungle was alive with sound. Insects. Birds. Monkeys. Rain dripping from canopy. The Marines moved quietly, but not silently. You can't move silently through jungle. You can only move carefully. Captain James Morrison commanded the Marine element. 28 years old. 3rd deployment. Combat veteran from Afghanistan. He'd planned the mission carefully. Rehearsed it twice. Studied satellite imagery until he could draw the terrain from memory. He knew the lab's layout. Knew the expected guard strength. Knew the extraction points. He knew everything intelligence could provide. But intelligence had missed something critical. Something that would turn the next 6 hours into hell. The Marines covered 3 miles in 90 minutes. Moving slow. Checking terrain. Avoiding trails. The Colombian guides led. Reading the jungle. Finding paths through the undergrowth. Good men. Experienced. They'd done this before. At 5:11 a.m., they were 2 miles from the lab. Dawn was coming. The plan called for hitting the target as the sun rose. Maximum confusion. Minimal visibility for defenders. That's when the lead Colombian guide stopped. Raised his fist. Freeze signal. He'd seen something. A piece of colored tape tied to a tree branch. Bright red. Recent. Not natural. A marker. A warning. The cartel knew they were coming. Before Captain Morrison could react, the jungle exploded with gunfire. Muzzle flashes erupted from 3 sides. Automatic weapons fire from elevated positions. Dozens of guns firing simultaneously. The sound was deafening. 2 Marines went down in the first 5 seconds. One took rounds to his plate carrier. Ceramic plates stopped them but knocked him flat. Another took a round through his leg. Screaming. Blood. The Marines returned fire and dove for cover. Training took over. Find cover. Identify threats. Suppress enemy fire. The jungle became chaos. Bullets shredding vegetation. Bark exploding from trees. The smell of gunpowder and jungle rot. Captain Morrison's radio operator was already calling for help. Contact. Contact. Taking heavy fire from multiple directions. At least 50 enemy. Request immediate. Air support. But something was wrong. The response was wrong. There shouldn't have been 50 fighters. Intelligence said 12 to 15 guards. Lightly armed. The lab was supposed to be a processing facility, not a fortress. This was an ambush. Prepared. Coordinated. Planned. And the Marines were in the kill zone. The first 10 minutes were pure survival. The Marines fought from whatever cover they could find. Logs, rocks, depressions in ground. Return fire was disciplined. Aimed shots. But the enemy had numbers and position. One Colombian guide was killed in the initial burst. Headshot. Dead instantly. 2 more were wounded. The Marines pulled them back, rendered first aid while under fire. Captain Morrison assessed the situation. They were outnumbered at least 3 to 1. Probably more. The enemy held high ground and had prepared positions. The Marines were in low ground with minimal cover. Textbook ambush. Perfect kill zone. He had 2 choices. Push forward through the enemy or fall back to the landing zone. Pushing forward meant assault uphill against prepared positions. Suicide. Falling back meant fighting withdrawal through 5 miles of jungle with wounded. Both options were terrible. He chose survival. "We're pulling back! Establish defensive perimeter! Prepare to move wounded!" But the cartel had planned for that too. As the Marines began tactical withdrawal, heavy fire erupted from their rear. The enemy had flanked them, cut off the escape route. The Marines were surrounded. 40 Americans and 11 surviving Colombians against an enemy force that was growing. More cartel fighters kept arriving, reinforcing the ambush. The sound of gunfire attracted them like blood in water. Stay with me, because what happens in the next 4 hours reveals something nobody expected about this fight. Captain Morrison made the decision that saved their lives. Instead of trying to break out, he formed a defensive perimeter, used the terrain, created overlapping fields of fire, made the jungle work for them instead of against them. The Marines dug in, literally, using entrenching tools to create shallow fighting positions, stacking logs for additional cover. Every man had a sector. Every gap was covered. The cartel tried to overrun them 3 times in the first hour. Mass assaults. Dozens of fighters charging through the jungle, screaming, firing wildly. It looked terrifying. It was terrifying. But the Marines had discipline. Aimed fire. Overlapping sectors. Each assault was shredded by controlled fire. Bodies piled up at the perimeter edge. The cartel learned that courage without training just meant dying faster. After the 3rd assault failed, the cartel changed tactics. They settled into siege positions, surrounded the Marines, maintained steady suppressive fire, didn't charge, just kept the Marines pinned down, waiting for them to run out of ammunition, because that was the cartel's real advantage. They had unlimited ammunition, supply lines through the jungle, reinforcements arriving constantly. The Marines had what they carried. And in sustained firefight, that wasn't enough. By 7:30 a.m., 2 hours into the fight, the Marines had expended 40% of their ammunition. Each man started with 7 magazines, 210 rounds. Most were down to 4 magazines. Still dangerous, still deadly. But the math was clear. At current rate of fire, they had maybe 3 more hours. Then they'd be fighting with rocks. The AC-130 gunship arrived at 8:00 a.m. The beautiful sound of those 4 turboprops. The gunship circled overhead, crew scanning the jungle with thermal cameras. They could see everything. Every fighter, every position. But they couldn't fire. The Marines and Cartel were too close, 50 yards apart in some places. The AC-130's 105mm cannon, 40mm Bofors, 25mm cannon, all useless. Couldn't engage without hitting friendlies. The gunship crew was forced to watch. Helpless. Captain Morrison realized the horrible truth. They were on their own. Colombian reinforcements were coming, but they were 6 hours out, fighting through roadblocks, ambushes on the approach routes. The Cartel had planned this comprehensively. The Marines had to survive until help arrived. 6 hours, with dwindling ammunition, wounded men, no water resupply, in 100-degree heat and 100% humidity. The real fight wasn't against the Cartel. It was against time and ammunition and exhaustion. One Marine, Corporal Jason Chen, had been hit twice, once in the arm, once in the side. Both rounds stopped by body armor but left massive bruises. Internal bleeding suspected. The corpsman had him on IV fluids and morphine. Chen kept fighting anyway. Refused to be casualties. Kept firing his weapon with one arm. Another Marine, Private First Class Maria Santos, ran out of ammunition at 9:15 a.m. She'd been firing controlled bursts, making every round count, but 4 hours of combat burned through 7 magazines. She switched to helping the corpsman, treating wounded, distributing water, moving ammunition from casualties to active fighters. The Marines created an internal economy. Ammunition became currency. Who needed it most? Where was pressure greatest? Magazines moved through the perimeter to wherever the fighting was hottest. By 10 a.m., they were down to 25% ammunition. 30 rounds per man average, plus whatever they could scavenge from the enemy dead. Several Marines had picked up AK-47s from Cartel fighters killed near the perimeter. Foreign weapons. Unfamiliar, but better than empty rifles. Captain Morrison made hard calls. Reduced rate of fire. Only shoot at visible targets. No suppressive fire. Every bullet had to count. The perimeter shrank slightly. Tightened. More concentrated. Easier to defend with fewer rounds. The Cartel sensed weakness. Smelled blood. At 10:30 a.m., they launched their largest assault. Over 100 fighters in coordinated push from 3 sides. They'd saved their strength. Waited for the Marines to weaken. The assault lasted 12 minutes. Longest 12 minutes of those Marines' lives. Wave after wave of fighters. The Marines fired until their barrels glowed. Used every trick. Aimed shots. Controlled bursts. Grenades at choke points. One Marine ran out of ammunition mid-fight. Grabbed his Kabar knife. Prepared for hand-to-hand combat. The Cartel broke first. Pulled back. Left 19 dead at the perimeter. But the Marines were finished. Down to an average of 8 rounds per man. Some had none. They'd survived, but they couldn't survive another assault. Captain Morrison called for emergency extraction. Immediate. Any method. He didn't care about the lab. Didn't care about the mission. He needed to save his Marines. But the landing zone was 5 miles away through jungle held by the enemy. And the wounded couldn't move fast. They were trapped. At 11:00 a.m., 4 hours into the fight, something changed. The Cartel fire slackened. Became sporadic. The pressure eased. At first, the Marines thought it was another tactic. Draw them out. Ambush them again. But the fire kept decreasing. Something was happening. Then they heard it. The sound that changed everything. The deep, rhythmic thump of helicopter rotors. Not the Blackhawks. Something heavier. Angrier. 2 AH-64 Apache attack helicopters burst over the jungle canopy. The most beautiful sight those Marines had ever seen. The Apaches were weapons platforms. 30mm chain guns. Hellfire missiles. Hydra rocket pods, and most importantly, forward-looking infrared that could see through jungle canopy. The Apache pilots could see what the AC-130 couldn't engage. They could identify cartel positions, distinguish enemy from friendly, conduct precision strikes in close proximity. The Apaches made their first gun run at 11:03 a.m. The 30mm chain gun fired 625 rounds per minute, each round explosive. The sound was a continuous roar. The jungle erupted in explosions. Trees shattered. Cartel positions disintegrated. The cartel fighters scattered, ran. Some stood and fired at the helicopters with AK-47s. Pointless. Bullets bouncing off armored gunships. The Apaches circled, engaging systematically. Hellfire missiles hit heavy weapons positions. Rocket pods saturated suspected concentrations. Within 20 minutes, the siege was broken. The cartel fighters were fleeing or dead. The ones who survived were running through the jungle, abandoning weapons, leaving wounded. The Apaches cleared a path to the landing zone. The Marines moved immediately. Tactical column. Wounded in the middle. Rear guard maintaining security. They expected ambush. Expected the cartel to rally. Make one more attempt. It never came. The cartel was finished. Broken. They'd lost at least 38 fighters killed. Dozens more wounded. They'd failed to overrun 40 Marines in 6 hours of trying. Failed, despite numbers, position, and preparation. The Blackhawks landed at 12:47 p.m. The Marines loaded wounded first, then equipment, then themselves. As the helicopters lifted, Apache gunships made final passes over the area, destroying the cocaine lab with Hellfire missiles. $340 million operation, eliminated in 30 seconds. By 1:15 p.m., all American personnel were extracted. 5 Marines wounded. All would survive. 1 Colombian guide killed. 2 wounded. The mission was technically successful. Lab destroyed. Cartel operation eliminated. But the cost. The close call. The 6 hours of hell. That night, after medical checks and debriefs, the Marines gathered. They didn't talk much. Didn't need to. They'd survived something that shouldn't have been survivable. 40 against 200. Surrounded. Low on ammunition. In enemy territory. They survived through discipline, training, courage, and some luck. A lot of luck. But here's what bothered Captain Morrison. What kept him awake that night and many nights after. What made this ambush different from normal combat. The cartel knew they were coming. Not suspected. Knew. The ambush was too perfect. Too well prepared. 200 fighters don't materialize in jungle randomly. They'd been staged, positioned, waiting specifically for American Marines. Someone had told them, given them timing, route, numbers, everything needed to prepare the perfect ambush. The investigation began immediately. Colombian and American intelligence, reviewing communications, checking personnel, looking for the leak. It took 3 weeks to find it. A Colombian police officer, assigned to liaison with DEA. He had access to operation plans, had family connections to Clan del Golfo. He'd been feeding information for 11 months. He'd warned the cartel about Serpiente Verde, told them when, told them where, told them exactly how many Marines to expect. He'd sold that information for $50,000. Sold it, knowing 200 cartel fighters would ambush 40 Americans. Sold it knowing people would die. When arrested, he showed no remorse. Said he was protecting his family. Said the gringos shouldn't be in Colombia anyway. Said the cartel would have killed his children if he refused. Maybe that was true. Maybe not. The Marines didn't care about his justifications. They cared that one man's betrayal had nearly killed them all. That corruption had turned intelligence into ambush. That the enemy they fought wasn't just the cartel. It was the system that allowed cartels to own police, to buy loyalty, to turn allies into enemies. The Colombian officer received 40 years in prison. The cartel paid his family anyway, took care of them, because that's how the system works. Betray for money. Get caught. The cartel still honors the deal. It encourages the next betrayal, the next informant, the next 40 Marines walking into an ambush. That's the real lesson from January 8th. Not the tactics, not the courage, not the firepower. The lesson is that you can have the best Marines in the world. The best training, equipment, and planning. But if someone sells you out, none of it matters. 40 Marines survived 6 hours in hell because they refused to quit, because they fought disciplined and smart, because Apache helicopters arrived in time. But they only needed to survive that hell because someone betrayed them for $50,000. The cocaine lab was destroyed. The mission was successful. The cartel lost 38 fighters. The Marines went home. But the war continues. Because for every lab you destroy, 2 more open. For every cartel fighter you kill, 3 more join. For every traitor you catch, another one is recruited. The Marines did everything right, fought perfectly, survived the unsurvivable. They should be proud. Their families should be proud. But somewhere in Colombia, another police officer is getting a phone call. Another offer. Another $50,000. Another betrayal being negotiated. And somewhere, 40 more Marines are planning a mission, trusting intelligence, trusting allies, trusting that the information they're given is true, not knowing that someone has already sold them, already told the enemy where they're going, already set the ambush. That's the war the Marines can't win with bullets and bravery. The war against corruption, against betrayal, against the economics that make selling out Americans more profitable than staying loyal. The jungle firefight lasted 6 hours. The Apaches broke the siege. The Marines survived. The mission succeeded. But the real battle was lost before they ever landed. Lost when someone decided 40 American lives were worth $50,000. Lost when the system allowed it. Lost when nobody could stop it. Captain Morrison received a Bronze Star for his leadership. Corporal Chen received a Purple Heart. The unit received a Presidential Unit Citation for their courage under fire. They deserved every medal, every commendation, every recognition. But the medals don't change the math. Don't stop the next betrayal. Don't save the next 40 Marines from walking into the next ambush. That's what keeps Captain Morrison awake at night. Not the firefight, not the fear, not the close call, but the knowledge that somewhere it's happening again. Another mission, another betrayal, another ambush being prepared. And there's nothing he can do to stop it. That's the real story from the Colombian jungle. The story of 6 hours in hell, and the $50,000 betrayal that put them there.